After having defined the problem and formulated our questions, the second step is gathering the data that will help us find the answers. Now, previously, I've provided datasets for you, and you've imported this data from a CSV into Jupyter Notebook. But what if you're on your own? Where would you get your data from? Well, typically, you'd Google away and search for one of the many datasets available online. After all, what if you wanted to build this valuation tool using house price data for your own city rather than for Boston? In that case, Google is going to be your best friend in every respect. But there's a third alternative for when you're just getting started and you want to practice your data science and machine learning skills. And that's to use some of the popular practice datasets that come directly from a Python module. In other words, some Python modules actually come with sample datasets that we can use. One of my favorite Python modules out there is scikit-learn. They've got excellent practice datasets, and you can see the whole list of scikit-learn's toy datasets right on this website. Scrolling down, we can see that they not only provide the Boston house price dataset that we're going to use in this section, but they've also got the famous iris dataset, which is used for flowers classification. They've got a dataset on diabetes, on digits, on wine, and on breast cancer. So this makes the search for datasets that you can use to practice machine learning and data science much, much easier. And that's because the really neat thing about using one of these datasets is that these tend to be much cleaner and user-friendly than some random CSV that you download from a website. These datasets are meant for testing and for practice, so you'll encounter far fewer missing values, fewer weird data formats, less non-relevant information, and fewer other problems. In other words, somebody has already done a first pass on the dataset so that you can crack on with a head start. Now, since we're going to be examining and predicting house prices in Boston, let's pull up the official documentation for this dataset and have a look at what it has to say. The information provided on the website is fairly basic. We can see the total number of samples, 506. We can see the dimensionality, which is 13. You can think of this as the number of columns in the dataset. And also down here, we can see some sample code for how to use this built-in dataset from scikit-learn. And we're going to be making use of all of this information and of all of these things in the coming lessons. So let's crack on and get started. The first thing we have to do is create a new notebook. It's going to be a Python 3 notebook. I'm going to click up here where it says Untitled and give this notebook a name. Call it 04 Multivariate Regression. Click Rename, and then let's add some section headings. For the first section heading, I'm going to change my cell to Markdown, put a pound symbol there, and then write Notebook Imports. Below this section heading, we're going to have all our import statements. So what's the first import statement that we're going to put in? The first import statement we're going to be putting in here is going to be loading our Boston house price dataset into our Jupyter Notebook. From the scikit-learn documentation, we know what this import statement should look like. It should read from sklearn.datasets import load _ Boston. So let's write that in here. Let's say from sklearn.datasets import load _ Boston. Now I'm going to add another markdown cell to single out the section of the notebook where we're going to gather our data. So I'm going to put a pound symbol here and then write gather data. We're going to try out a little bit more of the code that we saw in the documentation to get our dataset into our notebook. I'm going to insert some cells as well so that I'm going to be working more in the middle of the screen. And here we can call the load underscore Boston function, because this is the function that will actually return our data set. So I'm going to create a variable, call it Boston underscore dataset, and set the value of this variable equal to the return value from load underscore Boston, and then two parentheses at the end. So this function here will return to us our dataset, and we will store it in a variable called Boston underscore dataset. Let me hit Shift Enter, and let's check out the type of this variable. So I'm going to write type, open parentheses, Boston underscore dataset, and hit Shift Enter. And then we can see what kind of object we're actually dealing with. And as per the documentation, we can see that we're working with an object of type bunch. Now, usually, we typically want to work with a data frame. So let's make a mental note right now to convert our data to a data frame for later. But now let's take a look at what our data actually looks like in its raw state. And to do that, all we have to do is write Boston underscore dataset into an empty cell and hit Shift Enter. And what we get to see now is a whole bunch of output. Now, this is really, really difficult to read, and it's not formatted in a way that we want to sift through it. But the good news is that our data is there. We've successfully imported our data set, and we've got it in our Jupyter Notebook. And this will bring us to our next step, exploring our data set, cleaning our data set, and visualizing it. I'll see you in the next lesson.